I don't need custody. You keep the kid, just sign the NDA. I blinked at the thick stack of paper, the bold black letters across the top. Non-disclosure agreement. My hands smelled of butter and cinnamon. His smelled of leather briefcases and cold ambition. The contrast made me want to scream. Behind him, perched in the doorway with a mug of peppermint tea, Lorraine, my mother-in-law, the retired dean who'd perfected the art of smiling while slicing you open with words. She was in her robe, pearls already around her neck at dawn. Her voice carried that sugar-crusted sharpness I'd grown used to. Well, at least your cupcakes have some consistency, more than I can say for you. She laughed softly, sipping her tea like this was morning entertainment. Adrian didn't laugh. He didn't look angry either, just clinical. He zipped his suitcase, tossed our cat Lyra's collar inside like it was an accessory, and pressed his finger to the stack of papers. Sign this, Elena. You keep Theo. I keep everything else. Everything else. The townhouse we picked tile by tile. The car lease in his name. The savings I'd never seen, only heard about in passing when he came home late from the office. And apparently, even the cat. I felt my knees lock. My body stiff like the caramel I'd left boiling too long on the stove. My son was asleep just down the hall. 9 years old, curled beneath glow-in-the-dark stars we'd stuck to his ceiling, sneakers red as cherries waiting by his bed for school. He was the one thing I wanted to protect most. And now, his father was trading him away with a signature, as if parenthood were negotiable, as if love could be haggled like sugar by the pound. My lips parted. I wanted to shout, to slam the papers back into his chest, to demand how he could see Theo as a bargaining chip. But nothing came out. My throat clamped shut. The way it always did when Adrian switched into his boardroom tone, that voice that reduced me to silence, made me feel like I was crazy for even protesting. Lorraine leaned her hip against the counter, steam rising around her face. You'll thank him one day, she mused. Some women would kill to be given such an easy deal. No one expects much of you anyway. Her smirk, his suitcase, the cat's collar, the NDA. My chest burned with a cocktail of humiliation and fury. I steadied myself by gripping the metal cookie cutter in my hand, shaped like a star, edges pressing crescents into my palm. It kept me from trembling. The oven timer beeped again. A shrill reminder that something was burning. Maybe it was just the cookies. Maybe it was the life I'd thought we had. I forced myself to meet Adrian's eyes. They were pale, unblinking, reflecting none of the nights we stayed up naming constellations with Theo from our balcony. No trace of the man who once drove me 3 hours to watch a meteor shower because I'd mentioned it in passing. That man had been erased, replaced with someone who saw contracts where there should have been compassion. I pushed the papers back toward him, flour streaking across the title. Theo isn't part of your negotiations, I said, my voice low, raw, but steady. He's not a clause. He's a child. Adrian closed the suitcase with a click, the sound final as a gavel. Sign it by the end of the week, he said, or things will get messy. His hand brushed the papers once more before he turned toward the door. Lorraine followed, her perfume cloying, her teacup still steaming. She glanced back just once, lips curled. Don't overbake this, Elena. You'll only have yourself to blame when it collapses. The door shut. Silence pressed in. I stood in the kitchen, the timer screaming, the cookies blackening, the star-shaped cutter biting into my palm. And on the counter, under the fluorescent light, The NDA lay wide open, Adrian's pen clipped neatly to the side. I wanted to shred it, to torch it in the oven fire, to hurl it into the rain outside. But my eyes caught something in the corner of the page, small, almost hidden, a logo. Not from a law firm, not from court, from Adrian's company. Why would his startup's letterhead be on a custody NDA? What was he hiding? I didn't know then. I only knew one thing as I stood frozen in that sugar-dusted kitchen. If I signed, I'd lose more than custody. I'd lose the chance for the truth ever to be heard. And somewhere down the hall, Theo turned in his sleep, hugging his notebook covered in rockets. He had no idea the storm was already inside our walls. On the counter, the NDA waited, ink black, company stamped. My hand hovered, the star-shaped cutter leaving imprints in my skin, and the only thought running through me was, what on earth is he trying to silence? The house sounded different after they left. Not loud, not dramatic, just empty. Like the silence after a mixer shuts off in the bakery. You still hear the hum in your bones, but the room itself is hollow. I didn't touch the NDA. I let it sit on the counter, the cat's absence sharper than claws. I scraped the burnt cookies into the trash, their charred edges crumbling like the remains of something that could have been sweet if only I'd pulled them out in time. Theo woke an hour later, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, sneakers dangling from one hand. "Mom, where's Dad?" His voice was soft, almost casual, like asking if I'd seen his comic book. My throat tightened. I knelt, kissed his hair, and told him Dad had to leave early for work. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. He nodded and plopped into his chair at the table. The cereal box towered in front of him, dinosaurs dancing on cardboard, but he didn't pour any. He just sat there, turning the box slowly, eyes tracing the pictures like they might spell an answer. He used to chatter in the mornings. How fast can a T-Rex run? Do sharks have belly buttons? Could astronauts taste the stars? Now, silence. Just him and the box. I slid a plate toward him, a cupcake, still warm, frosted with a single swirl of blue. "Make a wish before you bite," I reminded him. "Our ritual." We called it the wishing bite. He closed his eyes, whispered something I couldn't hear, and took a tiny nibble. His lips barely curved, the shadow of a smile. That was enough to keep me breathing. After I dropped him at school, I drove my food truck, the Stargazer, to the farmer's market, but I couldn't bring myself to open. The boxes of cookies stayed sealed, the smell of sugar filling the cab like a cruel joke. I parked in the far lot, pulled out my journal, and began to write. Every word Adrian had spoken, every smirk Lorraine had thrown like a dart, every date, every hour, every slight. I cataloged it all. If he thought silence would protect him, I would build a wall of paper, detail by detail, to make sure one day his words couldn't disappear. That night, Theo padded into my room, dragging his blanket. He hadn't done that in years, not since kindergarten. He climbed into bed without asking, pressing close, whispering. The stars on my ceiling felt too far away. I wrapped my arms around him. His small chest rose and fell against me, steady but tense. I stared at the faint glow of the starlights through his open door, my heart breaking at the thought that even fake constellations no longer felt safe to him. The days blurred. I worked odd design gigs from the corner of our apartment, the soft whir of my laptop mixing with the hiss of the oven. Theo drew more now, filling pages with rocket ships and cartoon cats. In every picture, the rockets were leaving. Always leaving. Sometimes a little boy waved goodbye from the ground, sneakers red, expression blank. One evening, I found him sitting cross-legged on the rug, the gold rocket notebook clutched to his chest. His eyes were wide, serious. "Mom?" he asked. "Am I too sensitive?" My breath caught. "Who told you that?" He shrugged. "Dad says it sometimes. Grandma too." He looked down at the cover of his notebook, tracing the rocket's outline. "Is it bad, being sensitive?" I pulled the notebook gently from his hands and set it aside. Then I cupped his face, forcing him to meet my eyes. "No, baby. Sensitive means you feel things. It means you notice what other people miss. That's not bad. That's powerful." His lip trembled just for a second before he buried his face in my shoulder. I held him until he slept, the imprint of his small fingers warm against my collarbone. Later, when the apartment finally stilled, I opened my journal again. On the last page of the day, I wrote in bold letters. He said, "Just let him cry. He'll learn to stop talking." The words looked monstrous in my handwriting, too sharp for ink, but I needed to see them there, undeniable. I snapped the notebook shut. "Tomorrow," I told myself. "Tomorrow, I'll start looking for what he doesn't want me to find. Because if Adrian was willing to trade away custody for silence, then silence was hiding something far darker. If silence was heavy inside our apartment, outside it was deafeningly loud, and it had Adrian's name plastered all over it. It started at the school gates. One Tuesday morning, I spotted him across the courtyard, leaning casually against his black sedan. He wore a hoodie that screamed, "Number 1 Dad," letters bold and white, like a billboard announcing virtue. He knelt down as Theo approached, handing him a granola bar with a flourish. Parents around us smiled, murmuring about how wonderful it was to see a father so involved. I stood at a distance, the cupcake box warm in my hands, my throat dry. They didn't know that in the past 3 weeks, Adrian hadn't once called to say goodnight, that Theo had sat in bed clutching his rocket notebook, waiting for a FaceTime that never came. But Adrian knew exactly what to display in public. He tousled Theo's hair, exaggerated laugh echoing across the courtyard, and then looked up just long enough to catch my eyes. A smirk, not of warmth, but of ownership. A performance with me as the unwilling audience. Lorraine was worse. She slid into my inbox with emails that read like concern, but bled judgment between the lines. "Just checking that Theo is eating enough vegetables. He looked a little puffy in the last class photo. Boys need discipline, dear." I deleted most of them, but I saved a few, tucking them into my growing file. Each word was a brick, and I was building a wall of truth. The final insult came when Adrian posted a picture online. Him and Theo at a diner, both smiling over pancakes. Caption, "Making memories even when schedules are tough." Dad life, co-parenting, goals. The likes stacked up like confetti. Heart emojis. Comments about what a wonderful father he was. Friends chiming in with, "Theo is lucky to have you." I nearly dropped my phone. I had been sitting in the parking lot of the same diner that morning, waiting for Theo. Adrian had shown up late, grabbed him for half an hour, and returned him quiet and withdrawn. Not once had he asked about homework. Not once had he asked about the nightmares. But online, he was golden. That night, I stared at Theo as he drew at the kitchen table. His pencil scratched across the page, forming the outline of a rocket. Only this time, the rocket had 2 figures waving from inside, Adrian and Lorraine. The little boy stood on the ground, sneakers red, face small, forgotten. My chest ached. "Sweetheart, what are they doing in the rocket?" I asked softly. Theo didn't look up. They said they're going somewhere better. Without me. His pencil pressed harder, nearly tearing the page. And I think people believe them. I swallowed hard. The granola bars, the hoodie, the online posts, they weren't just performances. They were weapons. Weapons to paint me unstable, ungrateful, unnecessary. Later that week, I met with Ava, my lawyer, in a cramped office above a coffee shop. Her desk was lined with case files, sticky notes bristling like feathers. I laid out the screenshots, emails, posts, curated perfection. She skimmed, tapping her pen against her teeth. "Elena, this is frustrating, but not enough," she said finally. "Judges like balance. Unless there's something concrete, something that shows the harm behind the image, it's just noise. Without evidence, the court will assume he's a devoted father." The words sank like stones. I had been writing every detail, saving every scrap, but none of it mattered if it couldn't pierce the facade he built. I leaned back, clutching my notebook, my nails pressing half moons into the cover. "So what counts as evidence?" I asked, my voice sharp. Ava met my eyes, steady. "Something undeniable, something even his smile can't erase." That night, as I tucked Theo into bed, he whispered into the dark, "Mom, I think I know why Dad calls me too sensitive." His gold rocket notebook was clutched to his chest, pages trembling in his hands. Theo's voice that night still echoes in my head. "I think I know why Dad calls me too sensitive." He clutched his gold rocket notebook as if it could shield him, the corners bent from being hugged too tight. I sat beside him on the bed, tracing the glow-in-the-dark stars across his ceiling. "Why do you think that, baby?" He hesitated, chewing his lip the way he did when math problems scared him. "Because I cry sometimes, and he says boys don't cry. He says you cry too much too, and that I'll be messed up if I live with you." My chest tightened, hot and hollow all at once. I wanted to storm out, to grab my phone and fire off a message that would scorch Adrian down to ash. But Theo's eyes were on me, wide and trembling, searching for an anchor. So I forced my voice steady. "Theo, being sensitive doesn't mean weak. It means your heart works exactly the way it's supposed to. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He nodded slowly, but I saw the doubt linger, stitched into the curve of his shoulders as he turned to sleep. That night, I opened my laptop and started a new folder. Evidence. Every little thing went in there. Screenshots of Adrian's texts. "Your mom says no again. Surprise. Wish I could see you more, but your mom keeps you away." They were short, pointed, sugar-coated in victimhood, but poison all the same. I saved Lorraine's emails, too, the ones laced with knives disguised as pearls. "If Theo doesn't learn discipline, he'll end up like your side of the family. We're just trying to help." I printed them, slid them into clear sleeves, labeled by date. I even kept the silly ones, the granola bar photos Adrian posted online, the captions crafted to make him look like Father of the Year. Alone, they were performance. Together, they were a pattern. At first, it felt obsessive, borderline paranoid. But every time I questioned myself, another message arrived to remind me I wasn't imagining it. One evening, as Theo colored on the rug, my phone buzzed. A text from Adrian. "Don't tell your mom I messaged. She'll just use it against me." Except it hadn't gone to Theo. He'd sent it to me by mistake. My stomach turned to ice. I turned my head and watched Theo, bent over his notebook, drawing a rocket blasting off. Only this time, the rocket wasn't empty. Inside, a boy sat alone, looking out the window, while a speech bubble floated above. "Don't tell Mom." I swallowed the lump in my throat, pressed the screenshot into my growing file, and forced a smile. "Looks good, sweetheart," I said, though my hand shook. The cracks widened at school drop-off days. One morning, Theo tugged on my sleeve, whispering, "Dad said you're scared of me being with him. Is that true?" I crouched to his level, heart breaking. "No, honey. I'm not scared of you being with him. I'm scared of anyone hurting your heart." "That's different." He blinked like he wanted to believe, but confusion shadowed his face. Gaslighting worked best in silence. Adrian knew that. Lorraine knew that. They made me doubt myself, made Theo doubt me, and wrapped it all in smiles so no one else could see. But I was done being silent. That night, after Theo went to bed, I pulled out a tin box I'd bought at a thrift shop, dark blue, with constellations scattered across the lid. I filled it with everything I had: screenshots, emails, notes scribbled at 2 a.m. I pressed the lid shut and placed it on the top shelf of the pantry, hidden behind bags of flour. My secret constellation of truth. Still, the worst moment came unexpectedly. Theo padded into the kitchen, holding his gold rocket notebook, his small hands trembling. He set it on the table in front of me, open to a page where he'd copied a message. My stomach dropped. It was Adrian's words, scrawled in my son's handwriting, every letter etched with care. "Just let him cry. He'll learn to stop talking." Theo's voice cracked as he whispered, "He didn't mean for me to see it." But I did. The page blurred as my vision burned. My fingers clenched the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. Theo looked at me, eyes wide and glassy. "Mom, should I show this to the judge?" The words sat between us like a blade. "Should I show this to the judge?" Theo's gold rocket notebook lay open on the kitchen table, his small handwriting spelling out his father's cruelty. His sneakers tapped against the chair legs, restless, red laces swinging like warning flares. I wanted to rip the page out, crumple it into nothing, tell him no, that he should never have to carry this weight. He was 9. 9. His biggest concern should have been whether the cafeteria was serving pizza sticks or tacos, not whether he should expose his father in a courtroom. But his eyes, those dark, serious eyes that had seen more than they should, searched mine with something steadier than fear. "Baby, you don't have to," I whispered, my throat tight. "It's not your job to fix this. It's mine." Theo shook his head. "You always tell me to speak up when something's not right. You said silence makes bad things bigger." His voice wavered, but he didn't look away. "So maybe I should say it, even if it's scary." Tears pricked hot at the corners of my eyes. He was right. I had told him that. I'd built my parenting on the belief that his voice mattered, even when mine had been dismissed, drowned out, or twisted. And now, here he was, taking me at my word. I reached across the table, covering his notebook with my hand. "Theo, it's dangerous, putting you in the middle. Judges, lawyers, Dad, none of them will care how small you are in that chair. They'll ask questions, maybe hard ones, and once you speak, you can't take it back." He bit his lip, eyes darting to the side. "But if I don't say it, then it's like it didn't happen. And then, maybe he'll win." He looked down at the notebook again, voice barely audible. "And if he wins, Mom, does that mean I lose?" My breath hitched. I wanted to tell him no, that love would never let him lose. But I couldn't promise that. Not when I'd seen how easily Adrian bent stories, how Lorraine polished lies until they gleamed like pearls. That night, rain pattered against the windows like a drumbeat. Theo couldn't sleep, so we sat together in his room, the glow-in-the-dark stars casting faint light over his rocket posters. He leaned against me, whispering into the dark. What if the judge doesn't believe me? I brushed his hair back, kissing the crown of his head. The truth doesn't need to be loud to be real. Just speak from your heart. That's all you need. He held my hand tight, his small fingers laced through mine. And for the first time in months, I felt something stronger than fear stirring in my chest. Not just survival, resolve. The next morning, I called Ava. My voice trembled as I explained. He wants to speak. He says he needs to. On the other end, silence. Then Ava sighed, low and careful. It's risky. Judges don't always like putting kids on the stand. But if he wants to, and we can support him with documentation, it could change everything. Documentation? That word again. I thought of the tin box in the pantry, stuffed with screenshots and emails. I thought of the notebook in Theo's hands, the page that made him tremble. I thought of Adrian's NDA, stamped with his company's logo, still sitting in my drawer like a ticking bomb. A storm was gathering, and this time, I couldn't just shield Theo. He was stepping into it with me. That night, he came to me as I packed orders for the food truck, flour dusting my sleeves. He set his rocket notebook on the counter. If I show the judge, will you stand next to me? I knelt, looked him in the eye. Always. I'll be right there. He nodded, satisfied, and padded off to bed, sneakers squeaking against the floor. I stared at the notebook long after he was gone, the gold rocket catching the kitchen light. Just as I reached for it, my phone buzzed with a new notification, a forwarded email from Adrian's work account. Subject line: lock this down before the hearing. And in the body, NDA must be signed to keep her quiet. The forwarded email glowed on my screen long after Theo had gone to bed. NDA must be signed to keep her quiet. The words throbbed in my skull, sharp and deliberate. He wasn't protecting Theo. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting something else, something bigger, something worth silencing me for. I printed the email, slid it into a sleeve, and tucked it into the tin constellation box. Then I pulled the box out onto the kitchen table, emptied its contents, and began sorting. It felt like piecing together a puzzle no one wanted solved. Pages spread across the table, screenshots of Adrian's texts, Lorraine's emails, photos of social media performances. I grabbed neon sticky notes shaped like stars from Theo's school supplies and labeled each stack: manipulation, alienation, lies, performances. Hours blurred. My coffee grew cold. The hum of the fridge was the only sound as I taped timelines to the wall above the counter, a constellation of evidence connected by string. Theo wandered in, hair tousled, clutching his rocket notebook. His eyes widened at the wall. Is it like a map? I swallowed, then forced a smile. Kind of, a map of truth, so the judge doesn't get lost in Dad's stories. He nodded slowly, then placed his notebook gently beside the papers. Add mine too, so it's not just you saying it. His small voice steadied me more than caffeine ever could. Over the next week, gathering became my obsession. I pulled data from everywhere. Old voicemail records where Adrian's tone shifted from honeyed to harsh in seconds. Bank statements he'd left in the drawer, showing late-night wire transfers labeled only consulting fees. Smart home logs from the townhouse, timestamps of doors opening, and voice memos accidentally captured on the entry mic. One file made my stomach twist. Adrian's voice telling Theo, "Don't talk about this at Mom's. Be strong. Boys don't tattle." That one I played 3 times before I forced myself to stop shaking long enough to save it. I met with Ava in her office again, my binder heavier than a wedding album. She flipped through, page after page, eyebrows rising higher. "Elena, this is solid. Not all of it will be admissible, but together, it paints a story. Judges don't like stories, they like facts. But sometimes, when the story is undeniable, it becomes fact." She looked at me over the binder, sharp but cautious. "You're building something here. Just be ready, because once this is in the open, there's no going back." I nodded, though my stomach churned. I had been silenced too long. Even if my voice cracked, even if it trembled, it was time. At home, Theo helped me organize. He cut out little paper stars and taped them to the binder dividers, labeling them with his messy handwriting. Dad's texts, Grandma's emails. On the last one, he scribbled truth. That night, as I tucked him in, he asked, "Will the judge listen to me?" "Really listen?" I brushed his cheek, kissed his forehead. "Yes, the truth has a way of being heard, even when people don't want to." He seemed to accept that, curling into his blanket, sneakers abandoned by the bed. I sat beside him until his breathing steadied. When I returned to the kitchen, the binder waited on the table, thick, star-stickered, undeniable. I traced my fingers along its spine. For the first time, I felt the scales tipping, not in Adrian's favor. Still, something gnawed at me. The NDA stamped with his company's logo, the late-night transfers, the urgency in that email. This wasn't just about custody. This was about something Adrian couldn't risk leaking. I poured myself a glass of water, trying to calm the churn in my chest. That's when my phone buzzed again. A new message from Adrian, but the name at the top wasn't mine. It was Theo's. He'd sent it to the wrong recipient. I opened it, breath stalling. "Can't wait to be done with that brat so I can get my real life back." My water glass slipped, shattering on the tile. In the doorway, Theo appeared, rubbing his eyes, clutching his rocket notebook. "Mom, did Dad just text me?" Theo stood barefoot in the doorway, his rocket notebook pressed tight against his chest. His hair stuck up in tufts, and his voice was still thick with sleep. "Mom, did Dad just text me?" I froze. The shards of the broken glass sparkled on the tile like ice, water seeping across the grout. My phone screen still glowed with the words, "Can't wait to be done with that brat so I can get my real life back." I turned the screen toward him before I could stop myself. His eyes skimmed the message once, then again. His small face crumpled, not with tears, but with something worse, understanding. "He meant me," Theo whispered. "The brat is me." I crossed the kitchen in 2 steps, kneeling in the puddle without caring about the glass biting my knees. I pulled him close, the rocket notebook wedged between us. "No, no, baby, that's him. That's his cruelty, not you." His breath came shallow, hot against my neck. "Why would he say that? Why would he send it to me?" "He didn't mean to," I said, hating how true it was. "It was a mistake. But mistakes tell the truth." Theo leaned back, eyes glassy, sneakers dangling from his hand. "So the judge has to see this, right? He can't just smile and say he's a good dad after this?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to protect him from carrying it, from ever having to repeat those words. But another part, the part that had been burned too many times, knew this was the undeniable evidence Ava had been waiting for. The next morning, I printed the message, sliding it into the thick binder. I placed it in a new section labeled with Theo's star stickers. Messages to me. When Ava saw it later that week, her face went pale, then sharpened. "This is big," she murmured. "Judges don't like speculation. But this, he texted his own child. Even if he claims it was meant for someone else, the damage is written in his own hand." She looked at me carefully. "But Elena, are you prepared to let Theo speak?" "Because the court will want to know how he received this, and that means Theo will have to confirm it." I swallowed. Every instinct screamed to shield him, but Theo had already answered that question in his own way. That night, he climbed onto the kitchen stool beside me, rocket notebook open, sneakers swinging. "If I don't tell them, Mom, then it's like it's not real. And it is real." His pencil scratched across the page, copying the text in his uneven handwriting, as if to etch the truth into permanence. I stared at the words written in his child's scrawl, rage curling through me. Adrian thought he could manipulate, gaslight, silence. But now, his own arrogance had armed the one person he underestimated most, his son. Theo looked up, determination in his eyes far older than his years. "I'll read it if I have to. I'm not scared." I cupped his cheek, brushing away the single tear he didn't bother to hide. "You're brave, sweetheart. Braver than anyone in that courtroom." Still, my chest ached as I tucked him into bed. He should never have to bear this burden. But he wanted to, not because I asked, but because he understood something even I hadn't fully grasped. The truth wasn't just mine to tell. It was his, too. Long after he slept, I sat alone at the kitchen table. Binder open, phone buzzing with new messages from Adrian, angry, frantic, demanding explanations for why I hadn't responded. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. His words had already condemned him. At dawn, a new file landed in my inbox, an entire journal painting me as unstable, allegedly written months before. But when I checked the metadata, my blood ran cold. It had been created on Lorraine's laptop 2 days ago. The document landed in my inbox with a thud of finality. A PDF attachment, subject line: "Evidence of instability for court submission." My pulse hammered as I clicked it open. Pages scrolled past, filled with neat paragraphs that looked like journal entries, supposedly written by me. Words I'd never written. Lines that painted me as volatile, careless, unfit. Theo cried again today, and I screamed at him. I can't stand being his mother. I'm losing control. Maybe Adrian is right. I'm unfit. The sentences stabbed like knives, not because they were true, but because they were crafted to sound plausible. At the bottom of the file was my own name, typed neatly as if I'd signed it. I sat frozen, bile rising in my throat. My laptop screen blurred as tears pricked hot and merciless. If I hadn't known better, even I might have believed it. And that was the point. When I showed Ava the file the next morning, her eyes narrowed. She didn't even flinch. This is manufactured. She clicked into the file's properties, fingers flying across her keyboard. A window popped open, metadata lines scrolling in black and gray. She pointed with her pen. Created date 2 days ago. Author, Lorraine Cole. Relief and fury slammed into me at once. She made this? Ava cut me off with a sharp nod. And it's sloppy. They wanted something quick. something they could wave in front of the judge as proof, but metadata doesn't lie. She leaned back, crossing her arms. We'll submit this. It's not just useless, it's damning. Judges hate falsified evidence. I sagged against the chair, dizzy. For so long, I had been drowning in silence, in gaslighting, in shadows of doubt, and now, here was proof, not of my weakness, but of theirs. Proof that they would stoop so low they'd forge my voice to erase me. Still, a sick heaviness settled in my gut. What if the judge believes them before we can prove it's fake? What if they get it in first? Ava's gaze was steady, steel behind her dark eyes. Then we show the metadata. We pull the rug out in real time. Let them hang themselves with their own rope. That night, as I sat with Theo at the kitchen table, he noticed the binder open beside me. He traced the star stickers with his finger. Are those more bad things? Yes, I admitted softly. But they're not stronger than the truth. He looked down at his rocket notebook. Then I should still read mine, so the judge knows. Even if Grandma lies, my words are real. I pulled him close, my throat aching. Your words are the strongest thing we have. A few days later, outside the courthouse, I saw them. Adrian in a charcoal suit, Lorraine in navy with her pearls, clutching a folder fat with papers. She glanced at me, lips curling in a smile that wasn't a smile. She leaned toward Adrian, her whisper carrying just enough to reach me. Make sure it looks clean. Push for 50-50. Don't let the boy open his mouth. Her words sliced through the morning air, thin and poisonous. My spine went cold. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of Theo. I walked past them without a glance, Theo's hand warm in mine, his red sneakers flashing against the courthouse steps. His rocket notebook peeked from under his arm, gold cover catching the pale sun. As we stepped into the courtroom, I caught sight of Marcus, the polished lawyer Adrian had hired, standing tall, a practiced smile on his face. He opened their folder with a flourish, ready to present the forged journal. My stomach tightened, but Ava leaned in and whispered, "Let him. The trap's already set." Theo sat beside me at the petitioner's table, swinging his feet just above the floor. His red sneakers tapped nervously against the chair legs. He clutched his gold rocket notebook in both hands, holding it close to his chest like a shield. Across the aisle, Adrian sat polished and rehearsed in a charcoal suit, jawline sharp, hair slicked back. To anyone else, he looked calm, the picture of a father fighting for his son. But I saw the tightness around his mouth, the twitch in his temple. Lorraine sat behind him, navy blazer buttoned to the throat, pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her lips pressed so tight they were nearly white. The bailiff announced the judge's arrival, and everyone rose. Judge Hamilton, gray-haired, unsmiling, carried the weight of decades in family court. He didn't waste words, just nodded and sat. Let's begin. Marcus, Adrian's lawyer, stood first. His voice was smooth, confident, the kind of cadence meant to lull listeners into agreement. Your Honor, he began, Mr. Cole seeks equal parenting time. He is committed to his son's stability and emotional well-being. He has demonstrated consistent involvement, school events, meals, financial support. What we have here is not neglect, but rather a mother who, though well-intentioned, has shown instability. He paused for effect before lifting a folder. We submit into evidence journal entries written by Mrs. Rivera herself, indicating emotional volatility and difficulty managing her parental responsibilities. He handed copies to the bailiff, who distributed them to the judge and Ava. My stomach clenched. bile rising as I imagined those words being read aloud. The judge flipped through, brows knitting. These are written by the petitioner? Marcus nodded smoothly. Yes, Your Honor. Entries spanning months. They paint a troubling picture. Ava rose then, calm as stone. Your Honor, if I may? She walked to the bench, tapping the papers lightly. These alleged journal entries were created 2 days ago on a device registered to Lorraine Cole. The metadata has been preserved and verified. She handed over a report. This is fabricated evidence. It is not only inadmissible, but also a violation of the court's trust. The silence that followed was thick. Judge Hamilton's gaze sharpened, swinging to Marcus. Do you have a response to this? Marcus's composure faltered just for a flicker before he smoothed it back. If there was a clerical issue, the judge cut him off. This is not a clerical issue. This is fraud. His voice boomed, gavel slamming once. Lorraine shifted in her seat, face pale as parchment. Adrian's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might break. Ava didn't smile, but her eyes met mine, steady and certain. The trap had snapped shut. Now, the judge said, his tone sharper. Let's turn to the evidence presented by the petitioner. Ava gestured toward Theo gently. With the court's permission, the minor would like to make a brief statement. The judge looked down at my son. Are you sure, son? Theo's fingers trembled around his notebook, but his voice was clear. Yes, Your Honor. The bailiff guided him to the front. He stood so small against the vastness of the room, sneakers flashing red under the fluorescent lights. He opened his gold rocket notebook, pages fluttering like wings, and took a breath. My dad sent me some messages, he said softly, voice cracking but steadying. I wasn't supposed to see them, but I did, and I think you should know. The judge nodded. Go ahead. Theo's hands shook as he read. Can't wait to be done with that brat so I can get my real life back. The words hit the air like thunder. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Lorraine pressed a hand to her pearls, face blanching. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Adrian stared at the table, jaw stone tight. Theo's voice wavered, but he pressed on. He cries like a baby, just like his mom. Useless. He looked up, eyes glistening. My mom doesn't cry all the time. She's strong. She helps me when I'm scared. And I'm not useless. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. The judge folded his hands, leaning forward. Thank you, Theo. That was very brave. His tone softened, warmer now. Is there anything else you'd like to tell me? Theo hesitated, then whispered, I don't want to live in a place where I feel like I'm a problem. I just want to feel safe. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears sliding unchecked. My son, my little boy, had just spoken a truth no adult in that room could ignore. He walked back to me, clutching his notebook, and slid into my arms. I whispered into his hair. You did perfect. The judge cleared his throat, face stern again as he turned to Adrian. Mr. Cole, do you have an explanation for these messages? The gallery erupted in whispers. Parents shaking their heads, reporters scribbling. Adrian's mask cracked under the public gaze. Adrian finally lifted his head, face flushed. His mouth opened, but before he could speak, Marcus jumped in. Your Honor, we request a brief recess. Denied, the judge snapped. I've seen enough. He picked up his gavel, eyes cold. This court's responsibility is to act in the best interest of the child. Based on the evidence, testimony, and this child's honesty, I am awarding full physical and legal custody to the petitioner, Mrs. Rivera. Mr. Cole will have supervised visitation only, contingent on ongoing evaluation by a licensed family therapist. The gavel struck wood. Final, unmistakable. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. Then air rushed back into my lungs, heavy with relief. Behind us, Lorraine rose abruptly, pearls rattling, and stormed out before the hearing even adjourned. Adrian stayed seated, staring at the table, face blank, as if he'd been hollowed out by his own words. Beside me, Theo tugged my sleeve. His voice was small but certain. "Mom, can we get pancakes now?" And for the first time in months, I laughed. As we stepped out into the crisp morning air, binder heavy in my hands and Theo skipping beside me, a thought struck me. Adrian hadn't just lost custody, he had lost control. And men like him never surrendered quietly. The gavel's echo still vibrated in my chest as the courtroom emptied. Papers shuffled, murmurs rose, and yet all I heard was Theo's steady breathing beside me. His red sneakers tapped against the bench, as if marking the rhythm of a new beginning. Adrian hadn't moved. He sat frozen, staring at the polished wood table, as though if he glared long enough, the outcome might shift. His lawyer packed up quickly, avoiding his eyes. Lorraine was already gone. Her pearls no doubt rattling in some hallway, clattering like broken glass. I placed my hand gently on Theo's shoulder. "It's over," I whispered. He leaned against me, eyes tired but bright. "We won?" "Yes," I said, my throat thick. "We won." The judge's words replayed in my head like a hymn. Full physical and legal custody to the petitioner. Supervised visitation only. Those syllables felt like scaffolding around my spine, holding me upright after months of being bent double. Ava gathered the binder and handed it back to me. "You did it, Elena," she said quietly. "Not just today. All the nights you documented, every screenshot, every note, you built this." I shook my head, looking down at Theo. "No, he did. His voice built this." Theo smiled faintly, gripping his rocket notebook. "I just told the truth." Outside, the sunlight hit us sharp and golden. The courthouse steps stretched wide, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was walking into a trap. The crowd thinned around us. Somewhere behind, Adrian finally emerged, flanked by Marcus. His face was red, jaw locked, but he didn't look at me. He couldn't. Theo noticed, tugging at my sleeve. "Is he mad?" I knelt so we were eye to eye. "He's mad at himself. Don't ever think it's about you." Theo nodded, thoughtful. Then, with the simplicity only a child can muster, he asked, "Pancakes now?" I laughed, a sound that felt foreign but free. "Pancakes now." As we walked toward the car, I glanced back once. Adrian stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, shoulders sagging, a man cornered by his own lies. For a fleeting second, I almost felt pity. But then I remembered every tear Theo had hidden. Every night he curled into me, whispering that the stars felt too far away. Pity had no place here. What I felt instead was justice. Justice in the way the judge's voice had sliced through his rehearsed charm. Justice in the way Lorraine had fled, her careful facade crumbling. Justice in the way Theo's words, raw, unpolished, but true, had carried more weight than any lawyer's performance. We didn't just win custody. We broke the silence that had shackled us for years. When we reached the car, Theo climbed into the back seat, rocket notebook still in his lap. He grinned at me in the rearview mirror. "Mom, do you think the judge liked my sneakers?" I laughed again, tears slipping down my cheeks. I think the judge thought you were the bravest kid he's ever met." Theo's grin widened. He leaned his head against the window. Sunlight flickering across his face as we pulled away from the courthouse. For once, the road ahead didn't feel like an uphill climb. It felt open, possible. As we turned onto Main Street, Ava's words echoed in my head. "You built this." But it wasn't just me. It was a boy with red sneakers and a rocket notebook who refused to let silence bury him. It was pancakes waiting at the diner down the street. It was justice, served not cold, but warm, like syrup on a stack of waffles, sweet and undeniable. And yet, as I glanced at my phone on the dashboard, a notification blinked. New email from unknown sender. The subject line made my stomach clench. Appeal in progress. For days after the verdict, I kept waiting for the silence to break. I expected Adrian to call, to shout, to twist the knife one more time, but nothing came. His number stayed dark. His name never flashed across my phone. Instead, silence became something else. Not heavy, not suffocating, but still, quiet, the kind that feels like fresh air after a storm. Theo noticed first. He began drawing again, not just sketches in the margins of his rocket notebook, but full comic strips sprawled across the pages. Bright blues, blazing reds, bursts of yellow stars. In one, he drew a superhero mom in a cape battling a shadowy figure labeled the Liar. The hero's weapon? A plate of waffles. I laughed until I cried when he showed me. "Why waffles?" I asked. "Because you always make them when I'm sad." He shrugged. "They fix stuff." I hung the comic on our fridge, right next to the grocery list and overdue bills. It looked like it belonged in a gallery. Nights changed, too. He no longer padded into my room at 2 a.m., clutching his blanket. The glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling seemed to work again. He slept through till morning, his sneakers neatly lined by the bed when I checked on him. And mornings, those once heavy, quiet breakfasts, shifted. Instead of staring at cereal boxes, he peppered me with questions again. Could black holes burp? Why don't astronauts fall off the space station? Do cats dream in color? I didn't have all the answers, but I had him asking again. That was enough. For myself, I started breathing again. Real breaths, the kind that reached deep into my ribs. I picked up more clients for design work, choosing hours that allowed me to walk Theo to school, to bake in the afternoons. Money was still tight, but it no longer felt like a noose. Every dollar stretched toward living, not surviving. The Stargazer food truck became more than a job. I strung fairy lights shaped like stars around the window, and soon regulars began to leave notes tucked under the tip jar. "Your cupcakes made my week. Best blueberry scones in town." One note, written in a child's handwriting, said, "Your son is really cool. He talks about rockets." I kept that one in my apron pocket. On Thursdays, I joined a small book club at the library. Just women like me, tired, healing, stitched together in places we thought would never mend. We drank too strong coffee and laughed too loud. Sometimes, I caught myself smiling and realized I hadn't faked it. Theo and I created a new ritual, too. On Saturdays, after the market closed, we'd set up a wish wall on the side of the truck. Customers scribbled dreams on paper stars and taped them up. Some wrote silly things: win the lottery, free donuts forever. Others wrote quietly aching hopes: see my daughter again, get through the divorce, sleep without nightmares. Theo read them all with reverence, as though he were the keeper of secrets. One evening, he pointed to a star that read, "Find courage." He smiled up at me. We already did that one, right? I ruffled his hair, throat tight. Yes, sweetheart. We did. The world hadn't magically transformed. Bills still came. Work was still exhausting. And sometimes, loneliness crept in when the nights stretched too long. But the difference was clear. I wasn't shrinking anymore. Neither was Theo. He started soccer on Saturdays, cleats too big at first, his red sneakers finally replaced. He fell down more than he scored, but he laughed every time, cheeks flushed with joy. He began piano lessons too, plunking out clumsy notes that filled our apartment with sound. Imperfect, but alive. And me? I started dreaming again. Not big, not yet, just small. Steady dreams, saving enough for Theo's telescope, baking a new recipe each week, maybe one day opening a cafe called the Stargazer's Table. Sometimes people asked if I hated Adrian, if I wanted revenge. My answer surprised even me. No, I don't have space for that anymore. Hatred was heavy, and I'd carried enough weight. What I felt now was sadness. Sadness for the father Theo could have had and never did. For the man who could have been someone's safe place, but chose power instead. But I didn't carry his choices anymore. The day Theo read those messages in court, the cycle ended. The silence broke. Still, there was one reminder I couldn't shake. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet and Theo's soft snores filled the hallway, I sometimes opened my inbox to see the email sitting there, flagged but unanswered. Appeal in progress? It hadn't come from Adrian's account. It was from an unknown sender. No details, just that subject line. I closed it every time, refusing to let it swallow me. But its presence lingered, a shadow at the edge of the light. One evening, as Theo taped a new wish to the truck's wall, "Build a rocket big enough for both of us?" My phone buzzed again. Same sender. This time, the subject line read, "Round 2. When people ask me now what justice feels like, I don't talk about gavel strikes or custody papers. I talk about pancakes. The morning after the verdict, Theo and I sat in a booth at the diner, a mountain of waffles drowning in syrup between us. He wore his red sneakers, scuffed from the courthouse steps, and smiled so wide it nearly cracked his cheeks. For the first time in months, he looked like a child again. Not a witness, not a pawn, just a boy with too much whipped cream on his fork. That's what justice feels like. Sweet, simple, quiet. But it's not just about winning custody. It's about breaking something larger, the silence that tried to erase us. It's about a boy who refused to believe he was too sensitive, and a mother who refused to sign her voice away. If you've been through a custody battle, you know how messy, how brutal, how lonely it can feel. Maybe you were the parent fighting to be heard. Maybe you were the child stuck in the middle, waiting for someone to see you. Or maybe you were just the friend on the sidelines, watching someone you love shrink under the weight of control. If that's you, I hope you take this with you. You are not powerless. Not when you have the truth. Not when you have love. And not when you find the courage to speak, even when your voice shakes. Theo taught me that. A 9-year-old boy with a rocket notebook taught a courtroom full of adults that silence is the enemy, not sensitivity. His words mattered. Yours do too. So if this story moved you, even just a little, hit the like button. It helps more people find it, especially those who might be scrolling tonight, wondering if they're alone in their fight. Share this story so no parent or child ever feels voiceless again. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Share your story, your thoughts, your wishes. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're a grown-up child who once sat in Theo's shoes. Or maybe you just want to send him a message of courage. Whatever it is, your voice belongs here. If you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. I share real stories, messy, raw, healing stories that remind us resilience is possible, that families can rebuild, that love can survive even the ugliest battles. Thank you.